The office lived by rules of silence. Screens glowed. Keyboards tapped. Phones rang and stopped. Coffee cooled in paper cups before anyone remembered to drink it. At the center of it sat Ilya. 37. Dark suit. A watch that always ran 5 minutes ahead. He trusted numbers more than words. He believed in order, discipline, control. People called him precise. People called him cold. He wore both titles like armor. He liked walls. Walls kept life clean. Walls kept chaos away. So when the manager announced that a new employee was joining their department, Ilya's lips pressed into a thin line. New people meant cracks. Mistakes. Noise. He didn't like noise. The door opened. And in stepped Kirill. He looked younger than his years. Light in his eyes. A grin too quick, too open. His shirt was fashionable but careless, like he had dressed while humming a tune only he could hear. He walked as if the office belonged to him already. Ilya's judgment was instant. Trouble. Kirill reached out a hand, voice warm. Good morning. I'm glad to join the team. Ilya shook the hand for only a second. His grip was firm, cold, almost dismissive. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke. From that first hour, everything about Kirill irritated him. The way he asked questions, as if eager to learn. The way he joked, making colleagues chuckle when they should have been focused. The way he leaned back in his chair, relaxed, as though the weight of responsibility slid right off him. To Ilya, it was proof. Proof of carelessness. Proof of weakness. Once, Kirill arrived a minute late. A single minute. Ilya clicked his pen loudly and checked the clock in full view of the room. He didn't need to speak, the gesture cut enough. Another time, a column in Kirill's report misaligned by a fraction. Ilya stood over him, eyes hard. If you can't master basics, you won't last here. Kirill simply nodded, fixing the file without protest. And still, the pattern repeated. Questions. Small slips. Nervous smiles. Ilya saw only flaws. He didn't see how late Kirill stayed after hours, poring over manuals. He didn't see the quiet determination behind the mistakes. He saw only what confirmed his first thought, unreliable, unfit. Then came the presentation. A client with high stakes. No room for error. Ilya took the lead, as always. He assigned Kirill a corner of the task, something simple, something safe. Collect data. Format numbers. Nothing more. But when the files arrived, Ilya spotted gaps. Numbers out of place. Formulas broken. His chest burned. He felt vindicated. In the meeting room, under the projector's white glare, he turned on him. You've ruined this. I told you 3 times to check. Do you even listen? The words sliced through the air. Colleagues went silent. Eyes dropped to the table. Kirill's face went still. For a heartbeat, Ilya expected excuses. Arguments. Resistance. But none came. Only a breath. Only a voice, quiet, steady. I'll do better next time. But, you never even try to understand me. No anger. No challenge. Just a truth placed gently in the space between them. And for a moment, Ilya froze. Something in those words unsettled him. A crack in his certainty. A question he didn't want to ask, what if I'm wrong? But pride rose quicker. Pride silenced doubt. He straightened, adjusted his papers, and pressed on. He saved the presentation himself. Clean numbers. Tight delivery. The client left satisfied. The team exhaled. On the surface, nothing was lost. Control was intact. Yet when night fell and the office emptied, Ilya stayed. Alone, by the window, he watched the city lights flicker like scattered stars. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he heard only one sentence echo in his mind. "You never even try to understand me." It replayed. It scratched at his calm. He clenched his jaw, turned off the desk lamp, gathered his files. At the door, he whispered into the silence, half promise, half defense. "Tomorrow, I'll prove I was right." But tomorrow would not prove him right. Tomorrow would break his walls. The next day began like any other. Elevators opened, heels clicked across the floor, the same stale coffee smell filled the air. But for Ilya, the rhythm already felt disturbed. He noticed Kirill immediately. The young man was at his desk early, eyes focused on the screen, typing quickly. For a moment, it almost surprised him. Almost. But pride whispered, "It won't last. He's pretending. People like him always pretend." Ilya kept his distance. He gave orders, not guidance. Instructions, not conversation. He didn't want connection. He wanted results. By noon, friction had already sparked. Kirill asked a question about a dataset. A simple question. Ilya's reply was sharp. "You should already know this." Silence followed. Kirill lowered his gaze. The others glanced away. The air in the room grew heavy. Later, in the stairwell, Oksana, one of the senior analysts, spoke softly. "You're too hard on him. He's learning." "He's careless," Ilya said flatly. "He's young," she corrected. But Ilya shook his head. To him, youth was no excuse. Discipline mattered more. Discipline had no age. That evening, the manager assigned them both to a joint project. A system update, important, risky, requiring long hours. Ilya didn't like the decision, but he had no choice. He was told directly, "Work together." So they stayed in the office late. The building grew quiet around them. Screens glowed in the dim light. The hum of air vents filled the silence. Ilya typed, fast and precise. He barely spoke. Kirill worked slower, pausing often, checking his notes, glancing at him as if searching for approval he knew wouldn't come. When Kirill finally broke the silence, his voice was low. "You think I don't belong here, don't you?" Ilya didn't even look up. "I think results speak for themselves." A pause. Then Kirill whispered, almost to himself. "You never see the effort. Only the mistakes." The word stung, but Ilya forced himself not to react. He told himself it was weakness talking. That weakness always looks for sympathy. Near midnight, Kirill's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway to answer. His voice carried faintly through the glass door. Urgent. Quiet. Pleading. "I'll come tomorrow. Hold on. Please." Ilya heard fragments, nothing clear. He frowned, annoyed. Personal calls during work. Typical. When Kirill returned, he didn't explain. He just sat down and continued working, eyes heavier than before. The hours dragged. At 2 a.m, they finished. The update held. The system didn't crash. On the surface, success. But tension still hung between them, unspoken, unresolved. On the way out, as they waited for the elevator, Kirill finally turned to him. "You know. I don't joke because I don't care. I joke because if I don't, I'll break." The doors opened. He stepped in. His reflection in the mirror walls looked smaller, tired. Ilya didn't follow right away. He stood frozen, the words echoing. "I joke because if I don't, I'll break." For the first time, doubt crept deeper. What if he had been wrong from the start? What if beneath the smile was something else entirely? But then the elevator doors closed. And the chance to ask vanished with them. Morning came heavy. The sky was gray, the city slow, the office air stale. Ilya walked in early, as always. His desk neat, his tie straight, his face set in stone. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, however, the night before still echoed. He couldn't forget Kirill's words in the elevator. I joke because if I don't, I'll break. It replayed in his head like an unfinished song. For the first time, Ilya felt uneasy in his own certainty. He wanted to dismiss it, to bury it under numbers and charts. But shame clung to him, quiet and sharp. He realized he had never once asked himself why Kirill smiled so often, or why he stayed late, or why his eyes sometimes looked older than his years. And with that realization came discomfort. Not at Kirill. At himself. The day moved slowly. Meetings, calls, deadlines. Yet whenever Ilya saw Kirill at his desk, bent over the screen, focused and silent, a small ache pressed in his chest. He remembered every time he had cut him down. Every sharp remark. Every cold dismissal. By lunch, the weight grew heavier. He sat in the break room, coffee cooling in his hand, while Oksana spoke lightly about weekend plans. He barely listened. He kept glancing at Kirill, who sat at a corner table, eating quickly, scrolling his phone with tired eyes. Oksana noticed. You've been hard on him, she said quietly. Ilya stiffened. I'm hard on everyone. No, she replied. You're hardest on him. Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. He set down the cup. His reflection in the dark liquid looked unfamiliar, colder than he remembered. That evening, another project kept them late. They sat side by side, the office nearly empty. Silence stretched. Keys clicked. Screens glowed. At one point, Ilya leaned over to correct a line of code. His tone sharp, automatic. You missed a semicolon. Basic. Kirill didn't argue. He didn't even look up. He just fixed it quietly. But the silence after was heavier than any reply. For the first time, Ilya felt a sting of shame right in the moment, not hours later. He realized he had spoken not to teach, not to help, but to wound. And what made it worse was the look on Kirill's face, not anger, not defiance, only exhaustion. The shame deepened. Hours later, as they wrapped up, Kirill's phone buzzed again. He stepped out, voice muffled but urgent. Ilya caught a few words through the thin wall. Medicine, tomorrow morning, don't worry, I'll cover it. When Kirill returned, his face was composed, but his hands trembled slightly. He sat down without explanation, typing until the task was finished. Ilya said nothing. He wanted to ask. But pride chained his tongue. As they packed up, Ilya caught himself stealing glances. For the first time, he noticed the circles under Kirill's eyes. The way his shoulders slumped when no one was watching. The way his smile, so quick during the day, was nowhere to be found now. Walking to the elevator, the silence between them felt different. Not heavy with anger, but heavy with something unspoken. Ilya wanted to break it. To apologize. But the words caught in his throat. At the glass doors, Kirill finally said. You don't have to like me. Just, stop treating me like I'm already guilty. The words cut deeper than any argument could. Ilya stood frozen as Kirill walked into the night. His chest burned, but not with anger this time. With shame. Shame for every time he judged without knowing. Shame for never asking, never listening. Shame for building walls so high that he had forgotten there was a person on the other side. That night, alone in his apartment, Ilya couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, city lights flickering through the window, and whispered to himself words he had never admitted before. I was wrong. The walls he had built for years began to crack. The following week opened with tension. A major client threatened to leave. A system failure had delayed reports, and the company stood on the edge of losing trust. The manager called the team together, voice tight, hands restless. This project decides everything. We cannot afford mistakes. Ilya felt the weight immediately. He had carried such weight before. He was used to it. Control, precision, discipline, those were his weapons. But now he wasn't alone. He was assigned again to work with Kirill. The old reflex rose in him, distrust, doubt, suspicion. But beneath it lay something new, something he couldn't shake, shame, and a quiet awareness that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. They began late-night sessions. The office emptied, but their screens glowed long after. Ilya kept focus, scanning numbers, tracing patterns, checking formulas twice, 3 times. Kirill worked beside him, silent but steady. No jokes this time. No lightness. Only determination. At first, Ilya watched with suspicion. He waited for mistakes. He expected them. But the mistakes didn't come. Kirill's work was careful, thoughtful, almost meticulous. And when he paused, it wasn't to waste time. It was to think. To be sure. For the first time, Ilya noticed effort instead of flaws. Still, the old habits whispered. When Kirill suggested a new approach, a different way of presenting the data, Ilya's instinct was to shut it down. That's risky. We'll stay with what we know. But Kirill didn't retreat. His voice, though quiet, carried certainty. If we show them the same as always, they'll walk away. They want something human. Something alive. The word startled Ilya. Human was not a word often spoken in that office. Reports were numbers. Charts. Metrics. Not people. For a long moment, he stared at the screen, torn between instinct and curiosity. Finally, reluctantly, he said. Show me. So Kirill worked. He built a small feature, a filter that allowed the client to see results through their own lens, shaped for their needs. It was elegant. Simple. Personal. Ilya wanted to dismiss it. But he couldn't. It worked. It made sense. And yet, pride held him silent. He said nothing. Not praise, not approval. Only a nod. That night, as they packed up, Kirill's phone buzzed again. He stepped into the hall to answer. Ilya stayed still, listening despite himself. The words carried through the thin wall. Yes, I'll bring it tomorrow. The medicine. Just wait. Please. The tone cut through Ilya like a blade. He had heard that tone before, years ago, when his father had been ill, when every call had carried fear. For the first time, the pieces began to form a picture. The late hours. The exhaustion. The quiet phone calls. He wanted to ask. He wanted to break the silence, to step into that hall and say, I understand. But shame chained him again. His throat closed. He stayed seated. Later, in the elevator, he found the courage for at least one sentence. You're carrying something. Aren't you? Kirill looked at him, startled. For a moment, his mask slipped. His eyes were raw, vulnerable, filled with weight. But then he looked away. It doesn't matter. The work matters. And the doors closed between them. That night, Ilya couldn't rest. He saw the faces of the clients, the risk of failure, the numbers he had memorized. But over it all, he saw Kirill's eyes, tired and silent, and heard the echo of those calls. For the first time, he admitted to himself that his prejudice wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. He had judged a man without knowing his battles. And the shame of it pressed heavier than any deadline. The trial was no longer just about saving the client. It was about saving himself from the prison of his own pride. The morning after the long night, the office buzzed with nervous energy. Deadlines pressed closer. The client demanded updates. The manager paced the halls. For Ilya, however, the numbers on the screen blurred. His mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the sound of Kirill's voice on the phone. The quiet urgency. The word medicine. It gnawed at him all morning. Every time he glanced across the room, he saw it written in Kirill's face, the dark circles, the tired posture, the weight he carried alone. At noon, Oksana stopped by Ilya's desk. She held a file, but her eyes searched his. "You've noticed, haven't you?" she asked softly. "Noticed what?" Ilya replied, defensive by reflex. "That he isn't careless. He's exhausted. He works a second job at night. His mother's been sick for months. He pays for everything." The word struck like a blow. For a moment, Ilya couldn't breathe. He thought back to every harsh remark, every judgment. Every time he had called him careless, lazy, unfit. All the while, the boy had been fighting battles Ilya had never even asked about. Shame washed over him like a tide. Oksana placed the file on his desk. "You don't have to like him. But stop making his life harder. He already carries enough." When she left, Ilya sat frozen. His reflection in the black screen stared back at him, stern, rigid, proud. For the first time, he hated that reflection. That evening, the team gathered again to prepare the final demo. Pressure was high. One mistake could lose the client. Everyone worked tense and fast. Kirill, though pale and clearly tired, moved with focus. His hand steady on the keyboard, his mind sharp. He built out the feature he had suggested, the personalized filter. It was elegant, intuitive, something no one else in the team had thought of. Ilya watched him. Really watched him. And with every passing minute, shame pressed deeper. This wasn't a careless boy. This was a man carrying more than most could endure. At one point, a small glitch appeared in the code. Instinct rose in Ilya, the old reflex to snap, to scold. But he stopped himself. Instead, he leaned forward, voice steady. "Let's fix it together." Kirill glanced up, surprised. For the first time, Ilya saw not defiance, not weariness, but a flicker of relief. Hours later, when the others left, Ilya lingered. He found Kirill at his desk, gathering his things slowly. The hospital wristband lay on the edge of the table, forgotten. The name and date printed clear. Ilya picked it up gently. "Your mother?" he asked quietly. Kirill froze. His jaw tightened. Then, after a long silence, he nodded. "She's been sick for a while. Treatment's expensive. I work nights to cover it. That's why I'm, sometimes late. Why I look tired." The words carried no self-pity. Only fact. Only truth. Ilya's chest tightened. He handed back the wristband carefully. "I should have asked. Instead, I judged you." Kirill shrugged, as if used to it. People see what they want to see. But Ilya shook his head. "I was wrong." The admission felt heavy, yet freeing. The armor cracked further. For the first time, he wasn't the man who always had to be right. He was simply human. As they walked out into the night, the city lights flickered against the glass towers. Ilya felt the weight of his silence all those weeks. The harshness. The blindness. And he felt shame not just for what he had done to Kirill, but for what he had allowed himself to become. For years, he had hidden behind precision, behind pride. Now, one young man had forced him to face the truth, that his prejudice had not only hurt others, it had trapped him as well. The truth was out. And it demanded change. The truth changed everything. But it also changed nothing, at least on the surface. The office still buzzed, the deadlines still pressed, the managers still demanded results. Yet inside Ilya, the ground shifted. For days, shame lingered. It followed him like a shadow. Every time he spoke to Kirill, he heard echoes of his old words, sharp, cold, cutting. He hated them now. He hated the man he had been when he said them. And so, slowly, he tried something new. The first step was small. During a meeting, when Kirill suggested a design change, Ilya didn't dismiss it. He listened. Really listened. When Kirill explained the logic, Ilya nodded and said, "Good. Let's try it." The room fell quiet, surprised. Even Kirill blinked, as if unsure he had heard correctly. The second step was harder. Late one night, as they worked side by side, Kirill made a small mistake in the code. The old Ilya would have snapped instantly. But this time, he stopped himself. He leaned forward, voice calm. "Let's fix it together." The words felt strange in his mouth. Strange, but right. Kirill gave him a quick look, part relief, part disbelief. Then they worked quietly, line by line, until the problem was gone. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was steady. Comfortable. With each day, Ilya noticed things he had ignored before. How precise Kirill could be when given space. How creative his solutions were when not crushed by criticism. How his humor, once dismissed as careless, was in truth a way to keep the team breathing through long hours. One evening, after another exhausting day, they left the office together. The city was loud, full of traffic and neon. For once, Ilya didn't rush ahead. He matched Kirill's pace. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Ilya asked suddenly. "About what?" "Your mother. The night job. All of it." Kirill shrugged, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. "People don't want excuses. They want results. And I didn't want pity." Ilya nodded slowly. He understood. He understood too well. For a long moment, they walked in silence. Then Ilya spoke again, voice lower, more human than it had been in years. "You don't need pity. You deserve respect." The word surprised even himself. But when Kirill glanced at him, something softened in his eyes. A silent thank you. From then on, their work changed. They moved as a team. Ilya no longer carried everything alone, and Kirill no longer worked under constant judgment. The filter feature grew stronger, cleaner, smarter. Together they refined it into something the client had never seen before. The manager noticed. The team noticed. Even the atmosphere in the office shifted, lighter than before. For the first time, Ilya realized that respect was not lost when shared, it multiplied. But the greatest shift was inside him. He no longer felt the need to prove himself right at every turn. He no longer measured people only by flaws. He found himself watching, listening, trying to understand before judging. And though he did not say it out loud, he knew the truth: Kirill had changed him. One night, as they prepared the final demo, Ilya looked over at the young man beside him. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll take the lead. Show them what you built." Kirill froze. "Me? You're the senior. The client trusts you." "They'll trust us," Ilya replied. "And they need to see what you can do." Kirill stared for a moment, uncertain. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his tired face, not the light, careless grin of before, but something deeper. Something real. For the first time in years, Ilya smiled back. The awakening had begun. The day of the final demo arrived. The office was tense, every desk alive with whispers, screens glowing brighter than usual. The client was one of the biggest they had ever worked with. One mistake could cost everything. For years, Ilya would have carried this weight alone, armor tight, walls high. But not today. Today he stood beside Kirill, not as judge, not as guard, but as partner. The meeting room filled. The client sat across the table, eyes sharp, arms folded. The manager gave a short introduction. Then the floor was theirs. Kirill will lead this part, Ilya said firmly. A flicker of surprise moved across the room. All eyes turned to the young man. For a heartbeat, he looked uncertain. But then he began. His voice was steady. His words clear. He guided the client through the data, showing not just numbers, but meaning. He revealed the feature they had built, the personalized filter, the human touch. The client leaned forward, interest growing. Slide after slide, line after line, Kirill shone. His exhaustion vanished. His humor returned at just the right moment, breaking the tension, drawing a smile even from the sternest face in the room. When it was over, silence hung for a second. Then the client nodded. This is what we've been looking for. Relief swept through the team. The deal was saved. The company safe. But for Ilya, the real victory was not the contract. It was the look on Kirill's face, proud, alive, free. After the meeting, the team gathered in the break room to celebrate. Laughter, clinking cups, tired cheers. Someone asked Ilya to say a few words. For once, he didn't refuse. He stood before them, no notes, no armor. Just truth. I've built my life on walls, he began. Walls of control, of judgment, of pride. I thought they kept me strong. I thought they kept chaos away. But walls don't just keep out chaos. They keep out people. They keep out truth. The room grew quiet. Eyes watched him, waiting. I judged someone without knowing his story. I called him careless, when in truth, he was carrying more than I could imagine. I was blind to his strength because I was too proud to look past my own prejudice. He paused, breath heavy. His gaze found Kirill, who stood near the back, listening, eyes lowered. Prejudice is easy, Ilya continued. It asks nothing of us. Understanding is hard. It demands humility. It demands that we see people, not labels. That we ask before we condemn. That we listen before we decide. The silence in the room was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of reflection. Ilya's voice softened. If there is one thing I've learned, it is this: strength is not in being right all the time. Strength is in admitting when you are wrong. In breaking the walls you built around yourself. In building a bridge instead. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the applause rose, not loud and wild, but warm, steady, true. Kirill looked up. His eyes met Ilya's. And in that shared glance, there was no judgment, no shame. Only respect. Only gratitude. Later, when the crowd thinned and the night air cooled the city, they stood side by side outside the office. The noise of traffic filled the streets, but between them was quiet. You didn't have to say all that, Kirill murmured. Yes, Ilya replied. I did. Kirill smiled. Not the mask of jokes, not the shield of humor. A real smile. A tired, human, honest smile. And Ilya, for the first time in years, felt light. The walls inside him had fallen. The bridge stood in their place. Glowing star moral. Prejudice blinds us. It makes us see only what we expect, not what is true. Every person carries a story we cannot see at first glance. To judge without knowing is to harm not only them, but ourselves. Real strength lies not in pride, but in humility. Not in walls, but in bridges. So before you judge, ask. Before you condemn, listen. Before you turn away, remember, the person before you may be fighting battles you know nothing about. And sometimes, one act of understanding can change not only their life, but yours.